Hello, everybody. So this is Psych 3280, week 8, neural-based subconsciousness. And this week, I'm going to talk about consciousness and attention. So before starting this week's, I wanted to first go over the main points of week 1 to 7, because this is supposed to be after the midterm recess. So I wanted to refresh main parts for you. So first, the overall structure of this class is to learn the basics of the neuroscience of consciousness. Especially week 1 to 7 was focused on the basic aspects of the neuroscience of consciousness, and that is composed of 3 parts. One is phenomenology. I asked a couple of times for you to introspect your experience, and first starting with a natural scene viewing. What do you see when the completely unexpected stimulus is presented on the display? What kind of stuff you see? So this is the first step. And then I also asked you to introspect what you see in terms of the color at the periphery, and how does it actually get affected by eye movements, with or without eye movements, through several demos. And I also introduced a couple of demonstrations through the website showing backward masking and binocular rivalry or motion induced blindness, and then also visual after effects of motion and color, including after images. And then I also focused on some of the case reports from brain lesion patients. That's a very important kind of starting point for understanding phenomenology when some parts of the brains are damaged. And then the second part of the basic of the neuroscience of consciousness is about data, and the most important being the anatomical connections between the brains, at the large scale, or between neurons. And I also discussed about the anatomical structure of the eyes, especially in relation to peripheral color experience. And then the basic biophysics of the neurons, mainly dendrites collects input from other neurons, and then axons sends a pulse of action potential or spiking, firing to other neurons. And then I also mentioned about several different types of the behaviors, mainly button pressed, but also verbal reports types data, and some of them can contain non-conscious processing. And then also it's related to anatomy and the neurons, but there are the important concepts of receptive fields and the columnar organization in the visual cortex. Receptive fields are going to be important for this week's topic. And then again, another important topics for this week is the visual hierarchy and different kind of pathways in the visual system. And then I focus mainly on visual areas, V1 to V4, and MT, visual motion area, IT, inferior temporal cortex, and 2 higher areas, FFA and PPA, fusiform face area and parahippocampal place areas. And then I haven't actually emphasized much on the theory bit, and this is going to be a bit of the main focus from week 8 to week 12, the advanced part of this class. And but I mentioned and reviewed the neural correlates of consciousness as a sort of a theoretical guide to do the empirical research of the consciousness experiment. And then I mentioned also Crick and Cox V1 hypothesis, whether V1 is out from the conscious experience, is discussed a couple of weeks ago. And then related to theory, but it's distinct from theory of consciousness, I also introduced a couple of methods. One was the signal detection theory that is important to both quantify the objective accuracy of the tasks and also subjective metacognitive accuracy, how much you know what you're doing in relation to blind side patients, betting behavior, wagering behaviors, type 1, type 2 signal detection theory. And then also I briefly reviewed the various measures of the neurons, neuronal measures, functional MR, magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, electro or magnetoencephalography, brain waves, and then electrical corticogram, that's the direct recording from the surface of the brain inside the skull. And then I also talked about single neuron recording and the microstimulation of the brain areas last week in human patients. That's very important for consciousness research. So, in particular, so that's sort of the overview over the last 7 weeks. So you have roughly now the basics of neuroscience of consciousness to consider more advanced topics. And then the last week, in particular, we talked about the neural correlates of the color qualia, which is likely to be located in B4 or B8. And then also neural correlates of the perception of objects, especially in IT and within objects, particularly faces in FFA. And then we talked about the patient who cannot see the object like VAS, but can see the faces. That was a YouTube video and showing that that kind of dissociation demonstrates that faces are highly likely to be a very special kind of objects in the world, and generates this feeling of faces in distinctive manner. And then I also talked about neural recording from human patients, epilepsy patients who are awake and they can talk about our Aston experience, and then especially focused on the human hippocampus. And then towards the end, I also introduced the phenomenology of the binocular rivalry when the two inputs to the left eye and the right eye are discordant. The experience changes between them, and then I introduced this finger type rivalry or this whole type rivalry or third eye rivalry in front of the mirror for you to experience it without any special device. And then the behavior patterns of the button press duration or contrast dependency on the dominance duration of the binocular rivalry. And then that this kind of behavior or phenomenological characteristic was used to back up the evidence for the monkeys to be also perceiving binocular rivalry. And then during that kind of situation, Rothesis and other colleagues have done an impressive series of work to do the neural recording, and then found that B1 to B2 are not really correlated with monkeys' percept, and B4 and MT were much more correlated, but some of them were anti-correlated with the behavior. And then when it gets to IT, then most of the neurons were correlated with the monkey's report. Okay. So up until week 7, I put a couple of questions in the slides and also summaries, but haven't answered directly up until here. So some of these are, for example, in the case of the blind side, which we spent quite a bit of time, there was a subcortical pathway implicated as a sort of the culprit of this blind side behaviors. And subcortical pathway, especially superior colliculus and pulvinar, has been indicated as a very important substructure for attention. So that means something very interesting question, because blind side who lost conscious phenomenology still seems to have not only the behavior, residual behaviors, but has a potentially almost intact mechanism for attention. Then the natural question is, can attention work without consciousness? And that points to this question of relationship between consciousness and attention. And then the second thing is that when we talked about human single unit recording of binocular rivalry, these are always correlated with respect to the reports of the patient or monkeys. So if you think about this as a neural correlates of consciousness per se, that's not a problem, but it is also correlated with the reports. And consciousness and the report is not usually tightly correlated in everyday life. If you, for example, introspect yourself, you rarely report what you're experiencing moment by moment basis, right? So exact relationship between consciousness and the report is also another important topic to revisit this rivalry and single unit recording. And then another question, which is the most important and also biggest difficulty is that how is it possible that different regions specialize to give rise to conscious experience or specific qualia. So for example, we talked about the V4, V8 for color, MT for motion, and IT for object, FFA for faces, and hippocampus for some kind of concepts. And this relates to this hard problem that was proposed by Chalmers. And so far, I don't think I have given any kind of possible hints to how to address this kind of question. Why, this kind of different neurons in different areas generates different percept. It's very unclear, because if you look at the data that I have been showing, then all you saw is this pulse of this firing, and which it could be differently, modulated or different firing rate at the baseline or maximum firing rate for different areas. But it's really unclear why some particular neurons in hippocampus, which can maximally fire, let's say, 10 spikes per second, can generate concepts of Jennifer Aniston, while in neurons in V4 that can also fire, but half fire, let's say 100 spikes per second, can generate conscious experience of color. So these are the ones that are beginning to be addressed or thought to be addressed more theoretically in integrated information theory. And that's the kind of the things that we will be talking in the rest of the lecture from 8 to 12 in advanced topic, okay? And these three things are, in a sense, really at the frontiers of consciousness research. So this means that, it's a bit of the warning for the rest of the lectures. It contains quite a bit of my own research. And also I try to be balanced between, controversial part that I think, the answer is A, but, some people say, oh, it's not A, kind of controversy or debates. And I try to cover both sides, but I'm obviously aware that, I'm biased towards my own opinion. And also this means that, many of the things that you will be learning from week 8 to this week to week 12 can be refuted or can turn out to be wrong in the long time, perspective. It's also potentially true for week 1 to 7, but most of the knowledge about anatomical connections or neuronal biophysics are likely to stay true for next maybe 550 or 100 years. But many of the scientific discoveries are revised or refined across the time. So don't expect that all of these will stay true for the rest of your life. But the important thing is that week 8 to the rest could contain more sort of frontier, exciting kind of topics, but also it's more debatable or revised, possibly revised in a few years to 10 years, okay, shorter span. Okay, so having said that, in week 8, we are going to start examining the relationship between consciousness and attention. And learning objectives are to answer some of these questions, such as how can we define attention? What are the paradigms to manipulate attention? And what are the neural mechanisms of attention? And how can we explain the relationship between attention and consciousness? And for these matters, I refer to Quest for Consciousness Cox book, chapter 9 and 10. And then towards the end, I'll also talk about the global workspace theory that tries to explain the relationship between the attention and consciousness. And that's an optional reading. Okay, so that's the plan for this week and the review up until now. All right, so let's start the first part. What do we mean by attention? So starting the definition of attention. And attention is obviously an everyday word. So many of you already have a grasp, and also, if you go to the dictionary, they give some definition. And intuitively speaking, it contains at least 3 components. One is a general arousal or alertness or readiness to do something. So this is a sort of a global activation level of the brain or behavior or sort of your level of arousal, conscious level. And this is, of course, valid measure or the concept of attention, but not really the target of the concept this week. And then also another types of usage of attention is, this is a bit misleading in many ways, but when you make an eye movement, then people talk about attention. Okay, so this attention, which is accompanied with eye movements, overt eye movements, meaning that explicit or direct eye movements, or continued with a gaze, is in a sense, attention in an ecological sense. However, when we try to dissect the relationship between consciousness and attention, it's just a confound. As I already explained, in many lectures, when you look at different locations, then the phobia has a completely different, representation, and you see differently at the phobia and the periphery. So when you are talking about attention to consciousness without discriminating, what you are talking is, actual eye movements, actual fixation, location difference, then many things could be already different. So this is one important thing. And the covert shift of attention, on the other hand, means change of the attentional focus without moving your eyes. And I hope that you have been already doing this couple of lectures, but you can focus, and also you don't need to move attention, eye movements, from the fixation cross of this after effects, after image inducer, and then still attend to the periphery, or different kind of features or different objects of the vision. And this is the case of attention and consciousness research in many cases, because that one has much less confounding factors. Okay, and then after distinguishing these two things, the rest of the attentional concept is the focus of our topic. Okay, one is this selection, focus, concentration, and this is usually comes in two simultaneous operations. One is this enhancement or amplification of what you are attending to, and this comes at the same time suppression or inhibition of what you're not attending to. These two usually cannot be separated, and usually works in tandem, both in terms of neuroscience and also behaviors and also conscious experience. Okay, so this selection, focus, concentration part of the attention is the one that we want to capture in this lecture. And here's the most famous kind of definition of attention by William James, that's a father of psychology in USA. And this is highly widely cited. And maybe most of you have already seen this, and you don't have any problem with this definition, right? But if you say that that's totally reasonable, then that means that you're not attending in various ways. But say everyone knows what attention is. It is the taking position by the mind, it in clear and vivid form of one out of what seem several simultaneously possible objects or trains of thought. It implies attention is bullshit, attention is crap. Of course, the last two sentences is not what James was saying. And this kind of recognition or understanding of exact sentence requires both eye movements of this last sentence and also thinking or concentrating what this definition means. And here's the real definition. The last one is it implies withdrawal from some things in order to deal effectively with others. And this definition contains these three components of attention. Taking possession by the mind is corresponding to basically access or focus of what you're attending to. And then out of what seems several simultaneously possible objects or train of thoughts, this part is a selection, okay, or competition that we are going to talk about this week. And then withdrawal from some things, that corresponds to inhibition. It's always selecting or amplifying at the expense of something else. That's the attention. All right, and then attention, even if we define it that way, still there are lots of related concepts, and it's still confusing. So here's my attempt to make it more sense. Okay? One is this notion of a bottom-up attention. And roughly speaking, this is the attention component that is defined or induced or captured by the external stimuli. So for example, when there's a sound like this, then my attention is captured onto this one. Or if I see somebody coming into the room, then my attention is captured there. Even this can come with the eye movements, the head movements, but also it doesn't need to be accompanied. So covert shift of attention can be also captured. So this bottom-up attention or automatic or stimulus-driven task irrelevant. Task here means that when you're supposed to be doing some kind of task, let's say listening to the lecture or watching a lecture in a slide, something that is irrelevant for your current task is task irrelevant attention. And the exogenous means that in some stimulus that is in the environment and that is outside of the control of your own process. And then saliency based means that when things becomes conspicuous with respect to the surrounding, that captures bottom-up attention. And sometimes this is equated as a pre-attentive process. But that's a bit complicated kind of a concept, so I'll talk about it later. Okay, then the other one, in contrast, is a top-down attention. And these concepts can be almost like opposite or dual or to the bottom-up attention, and it is volitional. So while you are fixating here, you can volitionally control your attention to somewhere, and that's a top-down attention. And the goal-driven. So if you have some kind of goal to, let's say, move your hand over there or something like that, that's attention is already directed there, and that's a goal driven and task relevant. So if you are doing some kind of task, that anything that is in the visual field that is relevant for your task is attentive in a sense. And the endogenous is the dual to this exogenous kind of component. You drive the attention by your own internal mechanism. And then in contrast, pre-attentive, it's sometimes called attentive, okay? And in addition to this top-down and bottom-up attention concepts, there are many different dimensions or distinctions of attention components. One is about the space. So if you are looking at, center of the display, you can covertly attend to, here or there. Spatial attention can be directed top-down or captured by bottom-up signal in space. And then same goes for time and the feature. Feature-based attention is, for example, if you are looking now at a display, and then when you're paying attention to these letters, then letter of blackness actually is a feature of this display. So attention is now directed to the blackness of your letter. And that's the sort of the feature-based attention. And I'll talk about it towards the end of this lecture as well. And then similar to the feature, but object-based attention is also operating throughout. So for example, if you are looking at this display, then anything in the display is generally attentionally enhanced, but everything else as a background is suppressed to some extent. And object-based attention can also work at the level of the word. So if you're attending to the word attention, then everything else is also slightly less attentive. And here's the summary table in the Christoph Koch's attention chapter in 9. And then here, bottom-up attention, for example, is characterized in, so the bottom-up attention is characterized to work in terms of space. It's a throughout the field, whereas the top-down is spatially focused. And then feature-wise, it's across, it's working at all the times and all features and so on. And then it's related to the saliency, relating to the neighborhood features and so on. And then in the case of the top-down control, you can select specific feature. Like here, you can attend to the red thing here, and that automatically enhances the red thing over there and there and there, as well as this, part as well. And then duration-wise, bottom-up is usually captured only transiently, but the top-down attention you can sustain, by effort. Okay, and then the task dependency. So this is sort of the task relevance and some volitional control and so on. So now, after covering this, definition of attention, we can start to talk about consciousness and attention relationship. Okay, and here is two types of the models that psychologists and philosophers have thought about or assumed for many, many years. So one, the model A says that attention determines what becomes conscious and what not, hence determines what we can report about. So here, this is the sort of the bulk of the inputs, sensory inputs across vision, audition, touch, and taste, blah blah blah. Okay, and then among them, some kind of attentional filters comes in, and then attended process gets enhanced and selected, and then becomes conscious. And then that is something that people report. And that's the one that behavior science of consciousness can deal with. And then on the other hand, B thinks that attention can first operate, and some of them are already unconscious. For example, like any kind of process that dies out at the level of the receptive field, or let's say retina up to B1 or something like that, then that may still not reach to anything further by virtue of being just weak or something like that. And then some of them are attended and some of them are unattended. And then again, unattended one becomes conscious, and then conscious report follows. So in both cases, the B is non-attention mechanism can operate for consciousness. Okay, and in both cases, attention and the consciousness is the same sort of, so it's redundant, but it's important. It's a serial kind of idea, and here you can actually be general to make it like this kind of model. First, there is some kind of filter for attention, and the attention is attended component is what we can report in the consciousness. Okay, so that's the one view of consciousness and attention. On the other hand, the other type of philosophical or psychological model, which is still serial process, is that consciousness comes first. So here, after the sensory input, some kind of typically philosophers thinks about this as a magical process. Magical process divides it into unconscious part and the conscious part of the feeling. So in the case of the vision, what we feel like, this, conscious vision just comes in the first, and then some of the unconscious part remains completely inaccessible. And then within this, what we are conscious of, we can now direct attention for further sort of the processing. So let's say, now we are seeing this field, and then you want to attend more of this or more of that and so on. And that's the one that you can attend, and then eventually you can see it much better, and then you can report. Or putting it another way, when you're reporting something, it's automatically attended, and everything in conscious can be potentially attended, but conscious report is always preceded by attention. So that's another model. And then in other ones, it's many more inputs reach conscious states, yet to report about these, we need attention. That's another view. And from A to D, this is a serial models. And then here is one model that is a parallel process, but still thinks that the attention is necessary for consciousness. So here, the modeler thinks it's more to do with more prominently featured by the neuroscientists or cognitive neuroscience. This who knows that brain operates mainly parallelly. So here, input comes in, and then all of the processing is kind of processed in brain, and then attention can focus and also make some kind of spotlight of this processing. So this is a focus of the attention. And then that becomes available for consciousness, and then it can be reported. And everything else outside is unattended and unconscious. That's the attention is necessary view for A and C relationship. And then lastly, this is my, I'll just declare that, I think this is much more making sense based on the literature and also evidence, but consciousness and attention can be orthogonally operating. It's not to say that it's always orthogonal or, and so on, but first input comes, and then there are some kind of, conscious and unconscious kind of processing happens, and then attention can operate on some parts, and then here attended parts of the conscious processing and also unconscious processing can be both enhanced in terms of the processing, and then it can result in a conscious response or unconscious response. And then other parts here, these are, for example, it's not really available for consciousness and also unattended. The other part here, this is actually experienced and phenomenally sort of aware or experienced, and this is something that we will talk next week, but it's not really enhanced or selected, amplified by attention. And then this part is also consciously attended and also aware to the subject. And here, this part of the terminology, access awareness and the phenomenal awareness, is the one that we are going to talk next week. Okay, just upshot is that this model thinks that consciousness and attention can work orthogonally and parallelly, and all these dissociation can happen. Conscious with or without attention, unconscious with or without attention. Okay, in summary for this part, attention in everyday language can be used in various ways, but scientifically precise definitions are available, and we need to talk about it in this way, okay, a more precise way. And it's important when you read or write things about attention, clarify what you mean by attention, because there are many definitions and sources. And more important for the neurobase to understand attention and the consciousness, it is important to distinguish this because the neuronal mechanism for attention could be different for different kinds of attention. And this could be also true for clinical investigation of attention and consciousness. And the corollary is that the relationship between consciousness and attention can be dependent on the kinds of attention. So, towards the end, I also talked about various relationships between the consciousness and attention. And then in particular, distinction that is important, which we'll talk next week, is this: what we consciously experience per se versus what we can report about. So all these models, Victor Lame, who was proposing this, model structure, always distinguish between what we consciously experience and what we can report about. And this is not that easy concept to understand, but distinguishing or not distinguishing makes a huge difference in terms of the interpretation or theory of consciousness and attention. So the next part of the video, I'm going to talk about how we can manipulate attention experimentally and then to interpret it.